stand by while NCLA cuts through the noise to signal abuse of administrative power. This is Administrative Static with Mark Chenoweth and John Vecchione.
Welcome back to Administrative Static. Mark Chenoweth here, and my colleague John Vecchione is off spreading the administrative state gospel, or maybe the anti-administrative state gospel, off in the Pacific Northwest. But the good news is I have here to join me for the next two segments, Litigation Counsel here at the New Civil Liberties Alliance, Casey Norman. Casey, welcome back to Administrative Static.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be back.
And the reason we have Casey here this week is because she has just filed a complaint against, well, it would probably take half of the remaining time of the show to list all of the defendants
It's true.
that you named in this complaint. But tell us, who you're representing, who our clients are at NCLA, and what this case is about. Casey.
Sure. Yeah. So we have 6 clients, or the plaintiffs in this case. They're individuals, 5 of whom suffered really, really serious, debilitating medical side effects after they took the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, for the most part within hours after taking it. And our 6th plaintiff, Mr. Ernest Ramirez, he took the vaccine, didn't have serious side effects, but unfortunately his 16-year-old son took the Pfizer vaccine, and 5 days later he died just running in the park. They said it was myocarditis and an enlarged heart. So and I'd emphasize there that this case is not about the science of the vaccine itself or the side effects. This is a First Amendment free speech case. And that kind of takes me to the second part of this background, which is censorship. All 6 of our plaintiffs have used social media to post their personal experiences, what happened to them after they took the vaccine. They've used social media platforms like Facebook to create private support groups, groups of people who suffered similar side effects after taking the vaccine. And when they post speech on these platforms, they've just been over and over again censored, or their posts will be flagged as dangerous, violent acts or misinformation. So that's really kind of the core and the heart of our complaint here. We're saying that is unconstitutional for the government to be. Well, I should go back.
Well, let me stop you there, because I just want to make sure that our listeners are picking up on exactly what you're saying. So these are private individuals on Facebook who have joined with other private individuals into private support groups on Facebook just to share their own experience, for the emotional support of being in touch with people who are going through the same thing, to maybe share some links to articles about the vaccine, or about maybe sharing some things that have worked for them in terms of making them treating their symptoms.
Exactly.
And Facebook shut these groups down. Yeah,
I think most, if not all, of our plaintiffs have either created private groups like this or been members of groups. And like you said, these are private. They screen applicants before they're allowed to join the group. It's supposed to be only those who have suffered vaccine injuries. And yeah, the purpose of the groups is to share their experiences, share what worked for them. Doctors often are hesitant to diagnose these injuries as, vaccine induced. So they go to these groups to talk about what's worked and what hasn't. And like you said, they'll post links to, medical journals and articles about findings on this kind of injury. And, sometimes they'll do speeches or forums where they talk about their experiences, and they'll post links, YouTube links to themselves speaking. And those kinds of posts are being removed or labeled as misinformation. Or, often these groups are shut down entirely because they'll post something like this. And apparently that's deemed too dangerous of misinformation for even just the vaccine injured members in these private groups, not open to the public. So they'll take down the entire group itself. So it's really egregious.
One of the things that jumped out at me in the complaint, Casey, was you pointed out that in order to try to prevent these groups from being shut down, because they need the emotional support, they need to be, in contact with other people going through the same thing, as we all do. It's part of the human condition, that they were having to come up with code words so that they wouldn't say words like vaccine that might trip the powers that be that are monitoring their communications.
Yeah, no, you'll see if you read through the complaint, a lot of the dialogue between government officials in these Facebook or Twitter platforms are ways to kind of improve or evolve the algorithms to catch words like that. So if they can detect posts even on the private groups that say the word vaccine or that say the word COVID, the algorithm will catch it and it's more likely to be flagged or removed, or the group will be shut down. So like you said, I mean, they're still creating code words to this day. That they have to get more and more creative to be able to share with each other what has happened to them, because if they say the wrong word, or if the algorithm evolves enough to catch that VEE means vaccine, or things of that nature, then they're going to get shut down again.
Yeah, it's really shocking to me, and I sort of spoke loosely a minute ago. I said Facebook shut these groups down, but it's not really Facebook that we're concerned about here, is it? I mean, that's not the force that's not who you're suing in the lawsuit, for example.
Right. Yeah. All of our defendants are federal government officials or agencies. And the reason for that is, well, one, under the Constitution and the First Amendment, they apply to government actors, not private entities. But what we're seeing here is this is not just independent action on the part of the private companies, the social media platforms. We're seeing high levels of coercion, pressure, collusion from multiple officials in government agencies just across the board, which is why we have so many defendants that are attached to this complaint. Because, I mean, we've just seen...
And tell us who some of those are. So it's Rob Flaherty is the lead defendant. Right. And what does he do? Where is he?
So he is one of the senior advisors in the White House. And he, I think, if you look through the complaint and at just the level of pressure and coercion we've seen from some of these officials, I would say he is by far imposing the most pressure of anyone we've seen so far. But yeah, so we have multiple officials from the White House. We have DHS, CDC, the Surgeon General, Murthy, a number of people. We have one private entity which is being sued as a de facto government actor, and that would be the Stanford Internet Observatory.
And what's their role in all of this?
So they launched something called...
This is Stanford University in California.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah, it's a private entity. And during the pandemic, in response to what was perceived or deemed to be misinformation on social media platforms, they launched a project called the Virality Project. And basically its purpose was to monitor and flag posts on social media platforms that were deemed misinformation, very much in line with the government's censorship enterprise. And, anything that raises the word vaccine or questions the government policy, that's going to be deemed misinformation and something dangerous to be flagged. And we've included them for multiple reasons, including what I just said, but also they specifically singled out and targeted one of our plaintiffs, Dressen, in one of their most recent reports. In fact, they say Ms. Dressen, first of all, in their report, they're describing the types of dangerous, harmful misinformation that they're seeing on the platforms. And they specifically say individuals like Dressen who post, in essence, false information about side effects that they suffered from the vaccine, they need to be monitored, they need to be watched. And it expresses a lot of skepticism about her injuries and what happened to her. And what they leave out of this report,
or didn't know, or didn't bother to find out before they released the report.
Is that Bree Dressen, her injuries were studied by the NIH, National Institute for Health, exactly. And they diagnosed her side effects as vaccine induced. I mean, this isn't just speculation about what happened to her. It's it's pretty well documented.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is important for people to know about Ms. Dressen is she is not an anti-vaxxer. She actually volunteered as a participant in the AstraZeneca vaccine trials. That's how she got injured. She was one of the first people to step forward and say, "This is important. I'm willing to step forward and volunteer and essentially be a guinea pig for this vaccine in hopes that this will help with the COVID pandemic." And unfortunately, and look, we're not saying that these side effects are common, but they are real,
right?
And it did impact Breonna Dressen. And now the government is trying to shut that down.
Right, exactly. And I think that's true across the board. All 6 of our plaintiffs, none of them are anti-vaxxers. They don't have a political agenda in this arena. They like you said, they're talking about what happened to them, and they're seeking help and they're seeking support. And I mean, just to imagine suffering.
Very sympathetic, I think.
Yeah, all 6 of them.
People. I'm sorry, you were saying, just imagine.
Well, I was just saying, imagine going through what they did during the pandemic when we're already in lockdown, already kind of isolated, all of us. And then you're also suffering these injuries, but unable to talk to anyone about it. And you're being deemed a liar, a misinformant, almost, a criminal. And I think the social media platforms really provided them a way to
someone who's making the problem worse, essentially, whereas she actually volunteered
right.
as a vaccine trial participant in order to make the problem better. I mean, it's so, to me, it's crass and it's cruel what the government is doing to Ms. Dressen and our other plaintiffs.
Yeah, no, it is cruel. I mean, it's defies any conceivable bounds. I just can't even imagine what they went through during that time. They still are going through to this day. And I mean, Sean, it was a similar situation. One of our other plaintiffs, Sean Barkavaj, he volunteered to, study the vaccine. He's a nurse practitioner, and the same thing happened to him. So, I mean, we're seeing that across the board.
And we have about 1 minute left here, so I don't want to get into this too much. But tell me about Sean specifically. Like, what sort of what ways is Sean suffering? What are the results of the consequences of his vaccine injury?
Yeah, so Sean, I mean, he's a medical professional, and he helped and assisted with research of the vaccine. He was really, I mean, again, not an anti-vaxxer. He was trying to, assist with the science of the process. He volunteered to get the vaccine early, and he also suffered serious debilitating side effects, which continue to this day. I believe he's on leave for disability still. And he worked in New York, so I mean, they had this ominous looming mandate where you had to get vaccinated, and he's already suffering these horrible debilitating conditions, and he didn't want to take another vaccine, so he was unable to work. And he started private groups, support groups for others who were suffering side effects like him. And he's one of the people who's been really creative about creating code words for these groups to avoid getting put down.
Let's leave it there. We'll pick it up in the next segment right after this. Welcome back to Administrative Static. And if you were with us last segment, you know that we are talking with Casey Norman, Litigation Counsel at the New Civil Liberties Alliance, about her new lawsuit against the federal government, Dressen v. Flaherty, or Dressen et al. V. Flaherty et al., because there are 6 plaintiffs and even more defendants than that. Casey, we left off talking about one of your clients, Sean Barkavaj. But there's another one that is particularly moving to me, and that's Ernest Ramirez. Tell me, what's the situation with Mr. Ramirez? What happened to him and his son?
Yeah, so just to go back to what I was saying earlier, Mr. Ramirez is the plaintiff who he took the vaccine and didn't have serious side effects himself, but
I think he took the Moderna vaccine, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. And his son, who was 16, he took his first dose of the vaccine and died 5 days later from myocarditis.
And he took the Pfizer vaccine, I believe.
Yeah, at the time they'd announced, I think it was very recently after they'd announced that it was safe. Pfizer in particular was safe for teenagers, which is why he allowed his son to take it.
So again, not an anti-vaxxer, someone who was quick to take up the call, and he had been willing to get vaccinated himself, and as soon as it was available for his son, he charged ahead and said, "Hey, let's get that for Ernest Jr."
Right.
But instead of protecting his son, which he thought he was doing, his son ended up dying.
Yeah. I mean, it's devastating. And he took it first because he wanted to see, like, if this is genetic or, just to make sure it's safe for our family. And it was fine for him, but not the case for his son. So we've seen all the censorship we've seen is egregious, but this, I mean, with Ernest, there's some really striking posts that he's made that have been deemed to be false or removed, led to his accounts being frozen. As just one of many examples, he, on what would have been his son's 17th birthday in November of 2021, he posted a photo of himself at his son's funeral, like next to the casket. and didn't say anything about the vaccine, nothing about COVID. I think the only thing that he said was like saying goodbyes to my son, something like that. And he posted this on Twitter and on Facebook. And I believe on Facebook, it was deemed false information or misinformation. And, there's a link that says, check out the CDC for reliable information. And I think he got a warning too that said, if you continue posting things, deemed to violate our community standards, you're going to get your account removed or, get a strike against your account. And on Twitter, this photo was just removed entirely for breaking the rules, apparently. This is just one of many, many examples where he's posting things like this. Another one, it's not.
Well, you're posting things like this because you're trying to process your grief,
right?
And that's part of the process, presumably, is that you're sharing what you're going through with other people, and then here the government is coming in and denying you the ability to process your grief caused by the vaccine that the government approved.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. I have a 17-year-old. Well, he would have been 17 in 2021. He's going to turn 19 this year. I just feel so much for Mr. Ramirez and what he's going through. It's just inexcusable that the government would treat him this way. And then tell us about what happened with his GoFundMe account, because I think that's pretty shocking too.
Yeah, it is. So Mr. Ramirez, he lives in Texas, in southern Texas. And he wanted to kind of share what happened to his son and speak about it. And at first he was speaking locally, in southern Texas. But I believe he was invited, I'm not sure by what organization, but he was invited to speak in DC about his experience and his son. So he needed to raise money in order to get there. It's quite a journey. So he started a GoFundMe page to raise the funds to travel there and back. And within a week, I think it was like exactly 1 week, he receives a notice from GoFundMe that says, your page has been deleted. All the funds were forfeited. They were all returned to the people who had donated the funds. And he was unable to use the platform for that because apparently it violated their community rules or standards in the same way. He received a very similar message to the messages he's received, on Twitter and Facebook and all the other platforms.
And I'm just trying to figure this out, GoFundMe. Maybe you can send me a letter and explain this. So his son took the vaccine. That is a fact. His son died. Also a fact. His son died, according to the autopsy, from myocarditis. Also a fact. Myocarditis is a known side effect now of the vaccine. Also a fact.
Right.
And he wants to come and share that series of facts with a wider audience to get the word out. Maybe so someone else's son doesn't die the way that Mr. Ramirez's son died. And GoFundMe is like, nope, we don't want people spreading that kind of information, that kind of truth out there.
Exactly. Anything, like I said, it seems anything that raises the possibility of questioning the government's policy on COVID or the vaccine or anything, it's all being flagged as, at the very minimum, it's being flagged as lies or misinformation, and often just removed entirely or stopped before you can even begin to share what happened.
And some of these folks are afraid of, these are their own private accounts. They might be shut down off the platforms altogether if they don't abide by these conditions that the government is imposing on them. So we talked a little bit about the types of speech that are being censored, but you mentioned that Mr. Ramirez is in southern Texas. Is that why you filed the lawsuit in southern Texas?
Yeah, exactly. Our each of the 6 plaintiffs are in different states all over the country. But yeah, we opted to file this complaint in the Southern District of Texas. So that's where we'll be headed this summer, I guess, to kick things off.
So the complaint's been filed. What happens next? So the government, in theory, could answer, but what we've seen in a lot of these lawsuits, more often the government files a motion to dismiss.
Right. I suspect that is going to be the next step. We're going to meet the parties for our initial conference in August, and I would be shocked if they don't file a motion like that. So I think we're going to have to start preparing for a response to it.
Sure. And then what will you have to show? You'll have to show that the government actually did bear responsibility for these shutdown of these various accounts and these posts and so forth, and it wasn't just unilateral action on the part of the private companies. Is that where the crux of the dispute will be?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad that you raised that point, because many of my friends and family who are not lawyers have heard about this complaint in the case, and they all tell me like, I see there's a First Amendment violation of what you're describing, but how do you prove that this was government action? I mean, how do you prove that it's not just Twitter independently deciding like this is misinformation or we're removing this? And I think prior lawsuits, including another lawsuit of ours, Changizi, have faced that same question. And luckily for us, we are coming after another of our lawsuits, actually, Missouri v. Biden. And in that lawsuit, they reached the discovery stage, which means that they were able to get a lot of information from the government officials, agencies, and even third parties like the social media platforms. And this includes a bunch of emails, correspondence, communication, just constant communications between the social media platforms and these government entities. So we're starting off on a very strong foot because a lot of this is already public and out there. So it's not guesswork and speculation as to whether there is communication, collusion, pressure going on between the government and the social media entities. Whereas earlier on with Changizi, we didn't know any of this. We could, the timing of when censorship was happening versus public statements that maybe Biden was making, or, his press secretary, where, it was very clear there was something going on, but we couldn't prove it in the same way that we can now with so much more information, which is one of the reasons why our complaint is 124 pages long, because there's a lot out there.
Right. Well, it'd be nice if instead of filing a motion to dismiss, the government would file an apology and, just say, you know what, we're sorry. We should stop. We should never have done this. We should stop doing this. This is outrageous conduct that we've been engaged in, and we're going to stop doing it. And, I hope that the presidential candidates talk about this. I mean, this seems to me something worthy of discussion. And, I don't know that President Biden will have any competition on his side of the aisle, but there's a number of people running for president on the other side of the aisle. And I would think this would be a topic that they'd want to talk about and explain whether or not in their administration, the federal government is going to continue to censor the victims of vaccine injury and the parents of people who lost their kids to vaccine death.
I hope that they're listening and they decide to change their tactics and maybe issue an apology instead. I would love to see that. I don't think it's going to happen.
You're not going to hold your breath?
I will not. But they should take note if they're listening.
Well, one other thing that you and I have talked about, Casey, is the fact that the First Amendment doesn't just cover the right to speak. It also covers the right to hear speech that others are making. How does that come into play in your lawsuit?
I mean, that really touches on what we were talking about with the private support groups. I mean, they're using social media and these groups in the posts, not only to just share what happened to them, but I mean, to seek support, whether that's emotional support when they're feeling really isolated and alienated, and also medical advice, because they're not, I mean, this is a really new kind of phenomenon, and it's not clear how to treat a lot of these medical injuries and side effects. And so, when you have groups of people, like 1,000 people who all had similar symptoms, and maybe you find a few people that figured out what works for this. I mean, it is really new.
Yeah, they're advancing the science in their own way.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit as well.
So it's important to be able to receive this speech. It's not just about speaking about their lives or their experiences. They want to hear what others have to say. And that includes medical articles, journals, speeches where people talk about these kinds of things. I mean, they need to be able to receive this kind of speech, and it's unconstitutional to prevent them from doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. We have about a minute left, Casey. One of the things that I would love to see in this case is that you get in front of a jury. And I know that in the Southern District of Texas, it's a federal district court. A jury would be available if you are able to clear all the procedural hurdles like the motion to dismiss and so forth. What do you think a jury would think about what the government has done to people like Breonna Dressen and Ernest Ramirez?
I mean, there's no question in my mind that a jury would be extremely sympathetic towards these plaintiffs and what has happened. I would be shocked if we didn't receive a favorable decision from a jury. But like you said, there are going to be a few hurdles getting there. But if and when we do, I feel really optimistic about that outcome.
Yeah, I do as well. And I hope that we do get there. Well, actually, what I really hope is that the government sees the light and stops this outrageous conduct before we get there. But, if it doesn't, then NCLA is going to press through. And again, as Casey said at the beginning, this isn't about the science of the vaccine. This is about people who are actually injured. And do they get to speak about it? Or do they get condemned to silence by their own government? Well, thank you, Casey, for being with us and telling us about this new lawsuit. Good luck with the Dressen v. Flaherty lawsuit.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.